In a country with 1.4 billion people, it's probably self-evident that the primary sector, farming, is a critical component of the functioning of the country. More than 35% of the population of 1.4 billion people are farmers. Let's compare that to the United States, where we are the most productive agricultural country in human history, and we do this with less than 3% of their population. The Chinese are using hundreds of millions of people in the fields to procure food. One of the great problems, though, is that only around 11% of the country is arable land. Remember this term? That's land that's suitable for agriculture. Because of that, they must maximize their land's output. To succeed at that, the Chinese practice very intensive agriculture. This is also a term we met when we were talking about Southern South America. It means, in the case of China, lots of human input on the land, but also lots of food is produced per acre. So that means there's a lot of people who are working on the land. Clearly, they are using this lots of human input part when you consider hundreds of millions of people being farmers. Nevertheless, the way they farm, combined with that 1.4 billion person population, they have reached and exceeded their carrying capacity, which is the ability of the land to support the population with agriculture. As a result, they are large food importers. Most countries are net food importers, including some of the wealthy countries in the world. The US is a net food exporter. That doesn't mean that no food is imported. Of course, Parmesan cheese comes from Italy. But when you put it all in the scale, more food leaves the United States than comes in. In the case of China, it's exactly the opposite. More food comes in than goes out. Can you think of why that would be an issue? There are 4 forms of intensive agriculture practice in China. Multiple cropping, which means growing more than one crop on the land throughout the year. So the climate has to be mild enough during the winter to be able to support winter crops in order to be able to practice multiple cropping. This is a very common thing in California because we have a mild climate. Typically what will happen is during the summer, tomatoes will be in, then in the fall, they'll put in cabbages or broccoli or cauliflower, and then during the spring, strawberries will go in, and then back in the summer, we flip it back to tomatoes. Very common thing that's maximizing the use of the land by having a milder climate. Intercropping means growing more than one crop on the land at a time. Instead of devoting the entire field to, say, corn, the field is producing corn and beans and squash and fruit and so on. The combination of these first two, multiple cropping and intercropping, is that they provide nutritional variety, which is both necessary and healthy for human beings. The Chinese also practice aquaculture, which is fish farming. In fact, because rice is grown in flooded fields in warm climates, what tends to happen is that insects then breed in this standing water. What the Chinese do oftentimes is they introduce fish that can handle warm, slow-moving, muddy water, things like catfish and carp. And then those fish swim around in the rice fields, they eat the larvae of the insects and the insects themselves, and then when the field is drained and the Chinese harvest the rice, they also get to harvest this other nutritional benefit, which is protein. I told you, the Chinese are genius in a lot of ways. And terracing. Terracing is the process by which you make flat land out of hilly land. Much of China is rugged and steep. For thousands of years, they have terraced the landscape, thereby creating farmland in areas that would otherwise be non-productive. Again, it speaks to the hard work and the genius of the Chinese that they have maximized their productivity. However, because the population is so large, it still falls short. Here's a picture of my own backyard, my own garden. If you take a look in the foreground, you can see there's beets, and you can see there's some peppers that are left over from the previous year. And in the background is a little bit more beets. On the left-hand side, you can see the grapes are coming in. This picture was taken in the spring. You can see that there's onions and carrots growing back there. And even all the way towards the back, you can see that there's a little bit of an eggplant growing there. So what I have going on there is both intercropping and multiple cropping. I'm growing multiple things on a small plot of land, which, by the way, was a common thing for the indigenous peoples of the Americas. And because there's an overlap between seasons, there's intercropping and multiple cropping going on. Again, look at these rice terraces. All you have to do is look at the landscape of the background, and you can see how rough that landscape is in the background and how difficult it would be to grow anything on it because it's so steep. What have they done in the foreground? They've created these terraces, and by creating the terraces, you extend the amount of flat land you have, and you can increase agricultural productivity. It's remarkable.